Our Heavenly Father, we're so grateful for this wonderful day and for this chance that we have to receive some instruction and to be able to continue to assist thy youth in gaining their testimonies and in improving the lives of those who we come in contact with. We ask thee to please allow the Spirit to be with us, that it may prompt us and teach us and help us to improve. We're so grateful for thee and say these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Well, we really have been looking forward to being with you this morning and hope that... How many of us already started teaching? Okay, just a couple of you. You've probably heard this counsel. If you came out of BYU, I know you did, and I'm guessing that Brother Boyle probably said something similar. And that is, we hope that you're at peace and settled, and that you enjoy the ride, that you'll be able to just really thoroughly enjoy what you're experiencing. We want you to feel comfortable with each other. Right now it's only our newer student teachers that are here with us. At our first in-service, when school begins, you'll join with the others that have been teaching last semester and get to know them as well. But we want you to really be a cohort where you collaborate and help each other out. And it just raises everybody up when you're helping each other out that way. We want you to get to know each other a little bit this morning as well. And so we're going to take a minute. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So let's have you in threes. So Brother Campbell, let's have you on that back row. And Brother Jake, let's have you on this middle row if we could, please. Just if you would for a bit. And let's see, no, actually, it'd be better if I had you four and you four and you four. Okay? So Brother Jake's gonna be with these three. And, oh no, I didn't get you in there. You be both. You five. Okay, you five. Okay? And then once you're in your fours or fives, I want you to pair up. But some of you will have to be in the pair. Or actually, can I have you with Brother Campbell? Yeah. Is that okay? Here's what I'm going to have you do. So pair up, and I'll back up. I want you to spend the next 60 seconds getting to know the partner that you just paired up with. Okay? Everything that you can find out about them, because after those 60, and then after the 60 seconds you'll switch and you'll get to know the other one. Okay, and then so after those 2 minutes are done, you're going to introduce your partner to the other person in your group. All right? So decide who's first. Maybe whoever has lived closest to Cedar City, Utah, is the first one to interview.
Yeah, where are you from?
All right, 60 seconds. Find out everything you can about that person. Go.
Okay, so I'm Brandon Ames. I'm from San Diego, Utah, but I'm also from like everywhere. I've been like I'm a basketball. my biggest pastime, basketball and writing songs. I don't know how to play instruments anymore, and so I just like come to it in my head, and I have somebody else do it. So. Yeah. I'm studying social work. Yeah.
Did you play sports?
It's pretty cool. I like it. It's like
20 seconds for
subjects. Yeah.
Tell you the Elijah
Yep.
stories.
Yep.
All right.
Like
Switch. Now get to know everything you can about the other person.
Okay, so you say and take total. Would you say
That's what they let anybody else tell you. Detmer's secret.
How'd you guys meet?
Freshman.
Really? Look at that, little brother coming in strong.
You have 20 more seconds.
Transferred to West Virginia, went to dental school.
Yeah. Yeah.
I got in early and I had one class.
All right, that's it.
It was only offered once a year.
So now get with the others in your group, the 4, the 5. Get with them. And here's what you're gonna do. Why don't you start with alphabetical first names. So whoever comes first in the alphabet, or B. So Dakota, because Braden's name comes first in the alphabet, Dakota is going to introduce Braden to his group. And here's the deal though, these are the prompts that he's going to use. Alright, so everything that you just learned about Braden, you're going to use these prompts to introduce him to the group. You with me?
Yeah.
So you know who's being introduced first?
Amy's first over here.
Okay.
Amy.
Alright, go ahead.
So Amy, this is Amy, I don't know, I can't say her name. Tala, I knew that. She's from Hawaii, from Hawaii. Husband's from Samoa. 7 kids. Seven kids. You look at me like,
About
wait,
what
she has 7 kids and she's from South Central. She's from, she's been teaching in
I like it.
and, sorry, but yeah, I'm there, it's okay, I'll figure it out later.
Dakota's next to Offset, so.
Is he?
She's
Yeah,
from
this is
Sandy
Dakota.
Valley, she's here.
he's from
and she loves,
and
she loves her
he
kids.
has a wife because of his younger brother.
Mostly.
Second
Started
person.
teaching
He
in
loves soccer,
Spanish, no,
And I know
basic.
this because
Just lived in
he
Springville,
expressed how
but
much
no
he
longer
wants
lives in Springville,
to
right?
coach soccer possibly in the future.
What else?
You love the cold
This is
weather.
David. No. He's from Michigan.
These guys, just so you know, they're on the third person.
They are? Oh, sorry, taking too long.
He has 2 kids along the way. He's been married for 5 years.
Jason.
He's also graduated with his degree.
Wait, oh, so we're like, oh, that's
And
crazy.
he loves his family
That's
so
like,
much.
just like this, right here. Next conversation.
He went to Brazil on a mission. I know this because expressed it to me.
Did you say any other results from that last one?
I don't know what else to say.
You'll start.
So this is Jared.
Yes.
He's from Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. He has 9 siblings. He's got the 8th and 10th kids.
She's a reading special teacher in elementary school.
He loves
She
sports
teaches good.
and
Struggling
waste
kids.
food. I know this because he likes anything cat. Yeah, it's my favorite food. I said I don't.
I'll
Grew up in Florida, Orange High, down the street here.
What was your last name?
Went to BYU, played some football at BYU, then he transferred over to West
I did
Virginia.
something when I served in Washington.
Went to dental school, became a dentist. Practiced dentistry for
Really?
13
When?
years. 13 years, and he's had some adventures in the last year, and here he is, working in the same.
So we would have.
That does not do your story justice, which is amazing.
Would we have
We
more
probably
Yeah,
went to
we
a
have
national
national
team
meeting
together.
Yes. Our children ages 7 to 20.
Good job.
And, and their names, I'll go into that later, in their stories.
I'm really sorry for
Um,
Sal.
Yeah, that's
Based
good.
on these.
Yep, sisters, they're in other directions.
Your next question.
Introduce each other.
Before these, since they have these two left and you're done, then we're all gonna hear your. All right, see how they do.
Alright, this is Kenzie Doyle. She is from Pennsylvania. She has been studying sociology and she served a mission in Sao Paulo, Brazil. She's been back for a year. And she loves Latin dancing, and I know this because she told me.
Did anybody say anything other than that?
I mean, a different
Kind of an
version
awkward
of it.
Okay, go ahead.
This is Lindsay. I don't know your last name.
Wade.
Lindsay Wade. She's studying political science at BYU. She served her mission in Argentina. She's been back for almost 3 years.
Which mission?
Cordoba.
That's what I said.
Really? That's awesome.
She loves to swim, or she swims for a long time.
Yeah.
I know. That's what we talked. Did I miss anything? No. Okay.
That last question's a little awkward, isn't it? Maybe, so this next slide maybe will be a little bit more clear as to why we're gonna have you do it this way. I'd like you to take a minute and I'd like you to consider if this was the person that you were introducing, how you would answer those prompts, how you would complete those prompts. Will you take a minute and actually write this down? Give you just a minute to think through it. You give about 30 seconds more, and I know that's not very much time, but. Now, some of what you wrote might be a little bit personal, but there's probably some things that you just put down that you could share. Are there any that you feel you could share on how you answered any of those prompts? Start us out, Kenzie.
I think he has really think about what he has, and I always think he has patience with me when I make mistakes or when I don't know what I'm doing. So I think that was one big thing.
Yeah, and look how you answered it too. What else? Please. He has that. He has what we need. Good. Love it. What else?
I wrote down that he is my savior, and I like that. I mean, he's all of our saviors, but I love that it's like a personal my savior because we can all use him to receive that forgiveness and that love and strength that we need personally in our lives. So he's like personally our savior and our friend.
Thank you. One or two more that thoughts that came to your mind as you wrote? Please.
That was another one is that he's comforted me in times of hardship.
He has comforted me. Thank you.
I'm sure he's my best friend.
I'd be interested to know any of how you responded on this that you could share. Or some ways you answered that one. David.
Yeah. I said I know this because I've cultivated a personal relationship with him through scripture study, prayer, my personal trials, and also my repentance process.
Love that. Personal things for sharing that. Any others? Please.
Yeah, just saying, one single thing I know is that he loves me. And God is experienced his power, experienced his grace and his love. So I know that he is, like, really know that I know because of what he's done for us, for me personally.
For you personally.
He really is.
Remember when Joseph Smith comes in after the Sacred Grove experience and he leans against the fireplace and his mother asks him how he's doing and he says, I'm well enough off. Remember what else he says? I have learned for myself, the Presbyterianism is not true. I have learned for myself, being the key part of that, right? That I know this because, and there's a common theme in your responses there. You learned this for yourself. Any others before we move on? You want to share? You know, because this is really what you're in the business of. This is what you've been commissioned to do, is to introduce your students to him. And you may think, well, the bulk of my students are already Latter-day Saints, and in most cases, active Latter-day Saints. And so it may seem like they've already been introduced to him. They've been singing about him since they were in primary. But you can see this, right? In fact, in the Lectures on Faith, I think I have a slide for this. In the Lectures on Faith, the prophet Joseph Smith said this was really the intent of all writers of Scripture. Amy, can you see that from back there? Would you read that one for us?
The real design which the God of heaven had in view of making the human family acquainted with his attributes was that they, through the ideas of the existence of his attributes, might be enabled to exercise faith in him, and through the exercise of faith in him might obtain eternal life.
The purpose of Scripture is to acquaint you with the attributes of deity so that your faith in him can increase. And so as your students come to you, your objective is going to be to help them understand and rely on him and his teachings, to come to know him, to introduce them to him. And even though they've been singing about him since they were in primary, there is a lot that they have yet to learn. And you know that because you didn't know everything by the time you were in high school that you've come to know about him. And you're wise enough now to know that you don't know everything about him yet. And that as your life goes on, if you continue in the trajectory that you're in, you're going to come to know a lot more about him, and your love will deepen and deepen. And you'll look back at this point of your life and you'll think it almost isn't love, right? Like some old married couples will say when they look back at when they first met, first started courting. It grows so much. So you have an opportunity to acquaint them with him and help them understand what this is really all about. But as you start considering about that and what you need to accomplish with your students, what you're trying to do with them, you've probably had a lot of time these last few weeks to think about what really needs to happen in the classroom. What's the critical thing that has to happen? In the chartered course of the church, President J. Reuben Clark called it the sine qua non. It means without which nothing. It means if this isn't there, it's not going to happen. Now, you know, scripturally, probably what the sine qua non is in our classrooms. That if ye have it, ye shall not teach is, it's the Spirit. But when you go beyond that, what are the things that have been coming to your mind lately that you think, boy, I've got to do this, we have to have this, they need that, we need to. What are some of the things that have been coming to your mind? Can we just brainstorm for a little bit? The thoughts of the last few weeks that you think just have got to be happening in your classroom. And it can cover a range of topics, but Jason.
I'm really thinking about how to get them into the scriptures every day.
You want them in the scriptures. Good, I love that. Thank you. What else? What are some thoughts you've had? Has to happen in your class.
I mean, personally, I have to, make sure my life is balanced, so when I'm in a class, that I can, bring that balance to their lives as well, so my life is in balance. My children, my things are taken care of, that live my life in balance.
So you're talking about personal worthiness, cleansing the inner vessel. Good, I love it. What else? Sine qua non, it has to be there. Without it,
We talked about the law of two morality.
in the charted course.
Yeah, we need to talk about it. We need to make sure that Jesus Christ is in the lesson.
Yeah, good. I love that. Yeah, in fact, when you look, and I don't know that there will be time in this session that we're having right now, but if there's time, we're going to go to the charted course. President Clark talked about your message, your students, and you, and what needs to happen in each of those cases. That's a good one to catch. Yeah. Any other thoughts that have come to your mind? Things that you think, boy, we've got to establish this, it's got to be this way. Lindsay?
A relationship of love and respect with each of your students.
Yeah. I'm going to come back to it because I want you thinking, like, so how? How am I going to do it? Good. Kenzie?
Just participation from the students. I think if you're just sitting in a lecture, you're not going to feel.
Does this scare you a little bit, the thought of being in front of them and you're asking questions and you're getting crickets chirping and tumbleweed blows across the front, right? Does that scare you a little bit? If I'm just out there hanging? Brother Campbell?
Both of those comments are key to, you want them to participate, you want them to feel like they're loved and that, so that they can feel the Spirit. That's the thing I've been worried about the most, is how do you get the Holy Ghost there to teach them? That's who you want to teach them.
Yeah, absolutely true. So when we said, obviously the sine qua non, the scriptural without which nothing, is the Spirit, and all these other things are kind of moving us towards that outcome. Thanks, Amy.
I think a big part that we sometimes overlooks, we're so focused on the scripture and Christ, good things. But it's also to invite the Spirit, we have to create an environment that is one of order and cleanliness. And like a classroom that, even from decorations to the organization of if there's not routine and schedule for the kids, they literally can't feel the Spirit. It's because there's not as much order.
So in some of your cases, in fact, probably in most of your cases, you're borrowing a classroom, right? You're sharing a classroom with somebody. And so, have you thought about what's in your power to do? Have you seen your class? Raise your hand if you've seen the room that you're going to teach in. Okay. And have you kind of looked at the physical space and thought, do I like the way the desks are set up? Sometimes Brother Martin and I, when we'll go around observing some of the classes, we'll say, oh. And we'll chat with the student teachers and we'll say, look, you are not bound by this seating arrangement. When it's your turn to teach, come in 2 minutes early and just put it the way you want it and then put it back. And that's a lot of work, but when you're picturing what needs to happen, you follow those promptings and do what's the right thing. Even if it takes some extra effort that way. As you're forming a picture about all of these things, about what's happened, maybe a slightly different tack of what we were just doing, what we were just talking about. Think about in your classrooms, really what needs to be there, the expectation, what you're really hoping to see. In fact, let's just have a little discussion here about the seminary classes, the institute classes, the Sunday school classes that you've been in, and what you hope to, or what worked and what wasn't working. And in fact, you can be thinking about this as it relates to the seminary classes that you teach. You can also think about it as it relates to our in-service meetings that we have going forward. What needs to happen here when we're together? So, you started us out a little bit with some of this, but what are some of the positives and negatives? Jesse, will you give my scribe? Is that okay?
Yeah.
Positives and negatives. You started us out, but let's get some things up here on the chart. Some positive, and it doesn't matter which side you want to talk about. Things that you've seen in a classroom that worked and that didn't work, whether it's coming from you, coming from the students, your message, any of those things.
I think depending on the nature of the class, the sitting chart is really, really important. Definitely positive, especially with just thinking of the classes I just taught. They're very active. And originally when they came in, they didn't have a senior prepared and such stuff. So it was a little bit harder at first kind of maintain the order that I would like to
Good.
graduate class.
So you said seating chart, you added another one right at the end there, and that's order. We need order. Good. Lindsay, was it you that mentioned earlier about participation? That was Kenzie. Let's put that up there. What else? Please, and tell us your name.
So I'm Adam Attridge.
Yeah.
So on the participation thing, a negative is when you have one or two people that dominate
Yeah.
the comments.
So a monopoly. Yeah.
And even worse than that is when it's just the teacher that dominates.
Yeah.
It's just a lecture.
Teacher centric. Yeah. Any other things you want to put up there?
And with the negatives, any kind of distraction,
Like?
people are on their phones, or talking to each other, or sleeping, that's gonna take away from not only their experience, but the experience of the students around them.
As a student in classes, has it been a distraction for you when someone else is on their phone? Good.
I think a positive is to be personable and, or like a real person as the teacher that the students can relate to. A negative example that I saw of that, when I was doing my classroom observation, one of the days, there was actually a sub, and to introduce himself to the class, he spent like 20 minutes telling the story about when he was in high school and these dates that he was going on, and it was just really distracting and derailed.
It was awkward.
It was, yeah, it was awkward. I mean, he had the students laughing, but it was hard for him to transition into the scriptures from that.
So how would you word that? Oh,
Yeah.
don't be too yeah. Be yourself, unless yourself is weird. Don't be that yourself.
I was gonna say along those same lines, stick to the West. Stick to the, I mean, how many times have you been in a priestly meeting, or, you know, on Sunday, or I guess specifically on seminary too? I guess it's not about seminary, but priestly where they just get out of the scriptures and they start bringing all kinds of stuff, and where they, where they go with this. So stick to the
Focus,
Yeah.
right? By the way, you're thinking of this from the role of the teacher, obviously, but think about your students and the need, you know, what if they kind of take this in a weird direction? And we're off track a little bit. As you think about, what if I have a monopoly of comments? What if I have phones in my classroom? As you're thinking about these things, are you also thinking about how am I going to address these things? How am I going to cultivate this environment that we're establishing? Good.
I've been thinking about that first day and how you have to set the parameters and say, you know, this is how we're gonna do the class, and this is why we're gonna do it, so we can have the spirit, so they understand. And I want them to kind of set the rules too.
Okay, so you bring us beautifully to the point, Brother Campbell. How are you going to establish that on the first day? And I saw some hands come up as soon as you started talking. I'm assuming because they have similar thoughts related to it, but Amy?
Well, I'm really lucky that my principal actually has 3 to 4 days set out in the very beginning, what he calls training days. And it's literally to train the kids on how classroom management, what he expects of them, getting to know each other. And his whole thought is if we can cultivate this environment where they feel safe and accepted and they understand the expectations, that they'll rise to it. And so part of that is the whole classroom management. I have everything from callbacks to attention getters and like transition things that are okay, the kids know, kids are pretty easy, like, when they know when they're getting off track and you have, something like a symbol of some sort, whether it's, hand raising, like in touchdowns or callbacks, like, they know all of a sudden to come back. It's just different classroom management techniques that they answer to, and that can like totally retrain.
Yeah. One nice thing about the way that in your seminary, how they're gonna come together to do that training, is that your students will know that this isn't being imposed on you by a mean teacher.
Yeah.
This is what we are trying to accomplish
And
together.
he emphasizes, like Jason said, that it's, they're working with us in helping set those rules and expectations.
So in a large setting like that, it's gonna be pretty unidirectional
Well,
for the most part,
he's
right?
leaving it to each class, so I'll be with my class doing it, but all the classrooms are doing their own
Yeah.
training days instead of just like jumping right into the scriptures.
Because didn't you love what Jason said about, I don't wanna just impose
Yeah.
these standards on them? Before we let Jesse sit down, is there anything you wanna add to that? Because I think we need to talk about that. How do we do this in a way that's not imposing it on them, but they're contributing to the list?
I don't know if this is still relevant, but I was thinking about expectations and the difference between when you're expected to really participate in class and when you're not. I've been in classes in church where they're like, I know you don't want to be here, or I know you're not that interested, or I know we only have 5 more minutes, stay with me, and it just seems like they don't expect you to enjoy it.
Yeah.
And I think if we expect our students to enjoy the scriptures as much as we do, we will.
So how you see them will really flavor this a lot more. Okay. Jesse, you can go ahead and have a seat. Thanks for doing that. If they were left to my handwriting, that would have been trouble. Thank you. You think about how much of what you're talking about, what you're picturing, is dependent on the students. Then it's pretty important what Jason said about this isn't just being imposed on them, it's got to come from them. So how are you going to approach this? Jason?
When we do a family council with our kids, if we have a problem like about curfew or something, we'll ask them, what do you guys think? What do you think the curfew should be, or how should we do this? And they'll actually come up with different rules than what we would have done. It's always interesting when we do that. And so in a class setting, I'm hoping that I can get the students to say, hey, this is what we want. We want to have a class where everybody feels like they can participate and they feel loved and they can feel the spirit. So how are we going to do that? And then talk about what are we going to do about phones? What are we going to do about participation and all those kinds of things, and get them to kind of set the rules on how it's supposed to happen.
Yeah, just on that was, I can't remember what reason I talked about recently. It was that same principle that like, if you feel like it's coming from always that good door in that position, so you can do it now. It's not, if it feels like it's coming from you, like your home teacher, you want home teacher because you want home teacher, now because it's the present has to go with the mission as well. Like you're, reading lesson before Sunday school because you want to read next week, so like it's coming from you and not from your teacher, that you're more willing to do it, more likely to do it. It's something that you
It's intrinsic.
want to do, yeah.
Instead of imposed. Other thoughts? You know when I've seen this done really well, is by those two men right there. It's true. I've seen, in fact, we tried to find a recording of it. We had a recording of it once upon a time. It's somewhere on a lost or stolen hard drive. But we had a recording of Brother Boyle doing this in his classes when he was a teacher at Tempe. And what he did was pretty similar to what we just did. Just drawing a two-sided, two-column thing on the board with his seminary students at the beginning of a semester and saying, what are the experiences you've had in seminary that made it awesome? And what are the experiences you had that made it not so awesome? And they identified it. And there is something powerful about a 15-year-old kid hearing another 15-year-old kid say, I get really distracted when someone's on their phone. It's hard for me to focus when they're shooting aliens. There's something to that. When they talk about participation and they say, when the teacher asks a question, we just sit here silently, it just sucks the energy out of the room. When they're the ones recognizing that, it's kind of helpful. Right? Did I see a hand over here, Brother Martin?
Well, once you've done that, what I've noticed is like they'll always say the things that you would want them to say. I've done this in every class I've taught for
this kind of an exercise.
Yeah, I just say, I want you, the way I do it is I say, in this column, I want you to think of a seminary class that you just, or a class in church that you just absolutely loved to go to. What was it about that class that you loved? Like, tell me some of the things. And as they said it, I would kind of, not manipulate their answer. No, I'm not saying that, but I would,
Channel it.
yeah, kind of like, okay, so from what I hear, you loved it because everyone participated. Is that right? Because they'll say like 19 sentences, but really what it's down to is everyone participated. And then if you get those on the board, and then, okay, what made it negative? And then they say something, for example, like, well, I was in a class and no one would talk. Well, now fast forward 2 weeks, and you're asking a question, and the class is dead that day. It's just so nice to be able to go back. Do you guys remember when you were telling me about the seminary classes that you absolutely loved, and those that you didn't? Do you remember what you said about people not commenting? Come on, let's not be that class. You guys get with it. Be the class you wanted to be. And then it's just so much easier when you're saying, come on, live up to those standards that you said you wanted in a seminary class. It just comes across way differently than, do you remember when I told you what kind of a class I wanted you to be?
Now listen, I have a chart up here that I printed over at Kinko's that says exactly the way you're supposed to behave, and you are not behaving like a Kinko's poster. There's not as much strength behind that. When Dave recognized it, even without you having to say it, they know.
And I think introducing the discussion, asking the question, how you say it makes a big difference. If you say, what's the funnest class you've ever been in? And that becomes their goal, right? Then you're gonna get different comments up there for what class do you feel like brought you closer to Christ than any other class you've been in? What did you do to get there? As you're couching the purpose of why we're here in the seminary class, it's going to change what gets up there on the board.
For the things that we would like to communicate to you during this little session, there's less time than there is topics. One of the things that we hope that you'll take from this is the very caution that Brother Campbell gave with his comment when Jason said, I don't want to impose it on it, I want it to come from them. Because so much of your success is based on their role, then you want it to come from them. So be thinking through conversations like the one we just had, perhaps, with them being the ones populating that list. In addition to that, will you go in your Gospel Teaching and Learning Handbook to 1.3.3, page 6 in the hard copy. 1.3.3. If you would please. It's helping students fulfill their role in the learning process. And you're going to see at the end of that segment a little call-out box with Elder Scott's picture in it. As soon as somebody has that, will you raise your hand? I need to read that call-out box. Elder Scott's quote. It's so weird to live in a day where you don't have pages turning here. 1.3.3, it's the end of that segment, and it's Elder Scott's picture. You have that, Dakota? So everyone's getting there, but Dakota's going to read this. I want you to notice some terms that he uses that will help, because you put up here participation. And I want you to know something that he says in there. Please, Dakota, go ahead.
The student's decision to participate is an exercise in agency that commits the Holy Ghost to communicate a personalized message suited to their individual needs. Creating an atmosphere of participation enhances the probability that the Spirit will teach more important lessons than you can communicate.
So he says at the end of that statement that increasing participation increases the likelihood that the Spirit will perform His functions. Why? He also says that. Why does that increase the likelihood?
It's personalized to them.
It's personalized to them.
Exercise in agency.
They have exercised agency, and that authorizes the Holy Ghost to carry it not only unto, but into. That's Elder Bednar that pointed that out. That's over on the other page. So we want to increase the likelihood that the Holy Ghost will be in our teaching by increasing the opportunities for them to exercise agency. So when you're thinking about the expectations you're trying to establish for your class, you really want participation to be prevalent. You want them to be very engaged. You want them to be sharing and explaining things, testifying of those things. So now this is a whole other workshop session that we could spend a day on this topic alone about increasing participation. But are you forming pictures about the things that you can do that are counterproductive, as well as the things that you might do that are productive? What are some of the things that have come to your mind as you've been preparing to step into the classroom to help create, to cultivate this atmosphere of participation, a culture of it? You've borrowed classes when you went in for 471, where there was a culture in that classroom. And now you have the opportunity to start fresh and work together with these students to establish a culture. What have you pictured in your mind that's going to help cultivate that environment of participation that the students will fulfill their role? Please.
For me, it was definitely creating like a setting of love, so that it can create some sort of vulnerability, so that like people are willing to share. People are willing to share life experiences that they've had through, these discussions that we had. And when that love's not there, it's hard to be vulnerable.
So how will you do that? How are you going to establish this environment of love? Because that is absolutely what critical.
Yeah, I mean, the first and foremost, it's got to be, on my shoulders to make sure that I love these youth. Make sure that they feel that I love them.
How will they see it, do you think? And I don't pick on Brady.
I think a lot of it definitely has to do with the way that you portray yourself to them. If you're going in there, especially with the thought of, man, I can't stand this class, they'll see it. They'll see it in the demeanor that you got it. Yeah.
It'll show in your countenance. What are some other ways? I don't want to just pick on Braden. What are some other ways that you can establish this expectation of participation by this love that they'll sense from you?
I think the way two things, the way you not only validate what they say, but also the way you correct in terms of youth correction. So like when somebody shares a personal comment and you just say, oh, that was nice, and you move on, that they're not as willing to share those personal comments.
Your validation's a big deal.
Your validation's a big deal. That was so special. Thank you so much for sharing that with the class. I think that's big for.
So I'm gonna pick on you for just a second, Jared, and then I want to hear some of the other comments and hands that I saw. When Jared was doing, I think it was his second lab, I was sitting there watching a little window of that class, and there was a young man who did not want to participate. He had them doing kind of a paired thing, it seems like, and he just was not really engaged. It would have been a very easy thing for Jared to just kind of ignore that, especially since he was just borrowing this class for a day. But rather than ignore it, Jared walked up to him. And I was impressed that Jared addressed the issue with the young man, but also did it in a way that was respectful, but was authoritative. Not authoritarian, but authoritative. That he wasn't trying to just be this cool guy, right? He wasn't trying to be one of them. He was the teacher. But he just came and said, hey, you really have to do this. You really have to be a part of this. This is going to help you understand what we're talking about. I think it was a journal write, actually. And I encouraged the young man to get his journal out. I honestly don't remember if the young man ended up getting his journal out. But that's not necessarily indicative of whether what you did was successful. I think what you did was successful that day, even if you didn't get the journal out, because of what it established in a relationship. So you got to be thinking through, how am I going to do those things in a way that communicates love? What else? I saw Amy and then Brother Mark.
The principal I observed, he super loving, and what I noticed is he took an interest in their personal lives. I mean, he was asking all of the kids, from sports to how a funeral was to, I mean, he knew so much about them so far outside of the classroom.
Remembered it.
Yeah, for all of them, and it wasn't specific to just his class.
Mm-hmm.
It was for all of the students.
Some of those things will be fairly public. It will be appropriate and helpful to be fairly public about it. Just to ask them publicly, hey, how was that? And what happened? And some of those will be much more private moments as they're coming in saying, I was sure thinking about you. How did that go? love that. Brother Martin.
One thing that I think is really important that you highlighted in the way Jared handled that situation is we establish these expectations and get to know them, to have the focus always be on them,
On the student.
on the experience. So for example, if you pull a student after class and they've been kind of a knucklehead a little bit, and there's a big difference, and I've had both discussions and made this mistake and learned from sad experience, but there's a big difference between pulling someone aside and saying, hey, what you were doing today was completely inappropriate, and I'm not going to let that happen in my class. Do you understand? You know, like that's one, versus I'm worried about you. The way that you're acting in class, it doesn't allow for the Spirit to have the effect upon you and for these scriptures to have the effect upon you that the Savior hopes it will have. And I want you to have a full experience in this class. I want you to be able to feel the spirit of the scriptures. And I'm worried that you're not having that experience right now because of some of the choices that you're making. You see the subtle difference between? One is you're offending me and you're bugging me and this whole class. The other is I'm worried because I care about you and I know the scriptures are true and I want you to have an experience in the scriptures. And if you'll just remember them as you talk to them, that they are the goal. Not having reverence, they are the goal. I think it will help you to maintain a loving relationship while still holding the high standard.
I want to share this quick little email that we got just a day or two ago. Brother Martin and I received this, and I want you to think of this in terms of what you're communicating to the whole class when you interact with one student. That you think that this is just an exchange between one student, when really notes are being taken mentally across the board. This was from a student that emailed Brother Martin and I. One day, a couple of weeks into the semester, this kid was giving a super long comment that I had stopped paying attention to. My measure of a good teacher has always been how they respond to comments with love and appreciation and find a way to tie them back into the lesson. I was wondering how in the world you were going to do that with this comment. I mean, I was already impressed that you were still making eye contact and nodding. You responded perfectly and summed up the message of this student's story and made it make sense with the lesson. I was like, whoa, he's a good teacher. And then I was like, duh, he's literally teaching a class about how to be a teacher, haha. I had that same conversation with myself many times during the semester. It wasn't what was happening with this student. She was a student in the class where this was an exchange. Sometimes when you see things that are counterproductive, you have the task of tacking against the wind. Have you ever heard of that term before? Anyone ever heard of it before? Tacking against the wind means, you ever watched sailing boats and thought, well, how do they go the direction they want to go if the wind's blowing that direction and they want to go that direction? It's called tacking against the wind. It's catching the wind and directing it into the sail to push you the direction you want to go. Tacking against the wind. You can stop behavior. Anybody can stop behavior. What you need is to be able to still have forward momentum even when there's some negative things that are happening. You've got to tack against the wind. And so there may be some things like this. There may be some things like students who don't participate. There may be a student who goes off on a long tangent that's unrelated or asks questions that aren't very productive. To be able to take that and channel it in a direction that's more productive. And maybe it does require addressing with the student to say, this is what's happening, it's got to change. You've got to be picturing through how this is going to happen. Brother Boyle, you had a thought.
One thing that I've seen that makes the biggest difference with students that feel like they're pulling against you, or pulling back, or causing that wind, that oppositional wind, is finding an opportunity to listen to that student and find out where they're coming from. And it's probably not going to happen in a class setting with everybody sitting there, but it might be one of these little conversations where you take them aside and you're like, hey, it seems like you're having a hard time in seminary. how you doing? Are you doing okay? And giving them little prompts and little opportunities to share with you where they're coming from. Listening to a student communicates something, like in that class setting, that communicates something to the whole class. When you really listen to a student, it communicates volumes to those students, individually and publicly. But if we can find opportunities to listen to our difficult students, it's going to do a couple things. One, you're going to understand where they're coming from and be a lot less critical about their behavior in class. Two, they're going to understand where you're coming from, and they're going to be a lot less critical about your correctiveness towards
So
them.
you're not only establishing the expectation about what's expected of them, but
Yeah.
you're helping them understand what's expected of you.
Right.
That's in part from listening to them, but it's also part of communicating to them what's expected of you,
Yeah.
what the objective is. If we can have a shared vision in the classroom, united vision, that they understand as well as you understand, that our purpose is to help them understand and rely on the teachings of the atonement of Jesus Christ. Is this thing that we're about to do, this activity, or this behavior, is this going to help us understand and rely on the teachings and atonement of Jesus Christ, to qualify for the blessings of the temple and prepare ourselves, our families, and others for eternal life with our Father in heaven? If not, it doesn't really have room here. To establish that in a shared vision makes, I think, things a lot easier going forward. Brother Martin.
Well, I was just, every now and then you will have a student, and what Brother Boyle said at the end, you'll pull them aside and you'll say, I'm worried about you. You know, you'll have that discussion. They'll say, I hate the church. I don't even want to be here. And so it's not always like an ensign story. You know, it doesn't end like, but
Mine had been, actually.
so
Weird.
my students feel comfortable sharing. But the thing is even in that moment, if you keep it focused on the objective, like I had a student say that to me, and I was able to say, I understand where you're coming from, but you have to understand where I'm coming from. I know the church is true. I know that the Savior loves you, and I know that Joseph Smith is a prophet, and that the Book of Mormon is true. So because I know that, I can't act any differently than I'm acting right now with you.
I can't give up on you.
Yeah, I can't give up on you because I know this is true. And so I respect where you're coming from. I understand where you're coming from. You need to understand where I'm coming from. I love you. And I know that these scriptures that we're talking about are true and life-changing, and that your life will be blessed if you open up your heart and let them in. So thank you for sharing where you're coming from. Do you understand where I'm coming from? And I've never had a student react negatively to that. And it actually opened up doors to where I can still have a high expectation, even though they've said, I don't want to be here. And it's like, great. Well, I mean, not great, but I understand. However, you need to understand my heart and why I'm going to continue to try. And so these conversations and what he said there at the end are just so important to keep it focused on the objective and to really believe in that objective, that that's what we're all about.
Braden made a comment earlier that I think is really related to what Brother Martin just said, and that is, they'll know how I feel about them. If you say that, but you don't mean that, I'm not sure it will really stick. Ben White, who's a principal here in the Valley, or Orem, Ben White told a story about the first day of seminary, when he had a kind of a worksheet thing that he wanted the students to do. Were you there when he shared this story, Brother Boyd?
I don't think so.
And he had a young man came in, dropped his book bag, and immediately put his head down like that. And so class is going, and Brother White comes around with this thing that he wants all the students to do, and he slips it on this young man's desk, slides it kind of under his arms like that, and just gives him a little tap. And the young man does this. No words, but that communicates pretty clearly. Right? There's volumes in that. Just pushes it right off the desk. Over the course of that first day, Brother White, actually, I think it was over the first 2 days of class, he sees that same thing repeated multiple times in different ways, but the same attitude conveyed. He calls home. And to me, the power was in how he called home. He didn't call home to get the young man in trouble. He didn't call home so that he could say, hey, Mom, your kid's being a stinker, and it really is hard for me to do what I need to do. If he called home and he said, hey, I wanted to see if you had any insight as to how I could help your student. He's in my class. These are some things I've observed. He told Mom what he had observed, but he said, I'm afraid I'm not connecting right. I wonder if you have any things that would help me connect with him more. And the conversation with Mom was really not very productive as far as she didn't know what to say. She was at the end of her wits trying to help the young man herself. She said, I wish I could tell you, I don't know. He said, I'm not calling to get him in trouble. I don't want you to, lecture or get him in trouble. If you have thoughts, please share them with me. Well, she did talk to her son. I got a call from the teacher, and here's what he said, and he really wants to help you. She visited with her son about it, and he came back to class the next day, and came, I think if I'm remembering the way that Brother White tells the story, this conversation takes place at the end of class. So he's there, and he's not necessarily an ideal student, but there's a little bit more attention. And as class is done, he comes to Brother White, waits for everyone to leave, and he comes to him, and he becomes emotional. The young man becomes emotional and says, can you help restore my faith? Now, results may vary, but I think it was pretty profound that what opened a door there was simply love. It was a desire to help however I can help. And when he thought, I have someone here who's concerned and interested, I'm going to give it a shot. Now, if you ask Brother White about that, and I've asked him some follow-up questions. The young man, it was not a awesome upward trajectory. There were a lot of struggles for that young man ahead. And it's not like everything turned out peachy keen after that. But it's where we have to start. I think it's the sine qua non, one of the sine qua non. I'm not sure, but I would think that at some point in a future in-service, you and I might sit down and have a little discussion about your faith in your message, in your students, even in your, can't remember if we talked about cleansing the inner vessel, is that you, Jared? There are things that you need to believe stepping into the classroom. It might be hard to imagine, but I played high school football. And I remember before the games would begin, where these guys would get all taped up, and they would be in the locker room, and they'd be pounding their heads against lockers and listening to Metallica, and hammering each other on their shoulder pads, and trying to get the adrenaline going for the game, and yelling at each other and everything. And I'm in there, all like 125 pounds of me is in there, and just kind of like, I walked through the shadow of death. and I would just kind of, try to get ready for the game. And I remember watching my best friend, he was my next door neighbor, my best friend, we had grown up together, and he was, for me personally, he's the best athlete I've known personally, the best high school athlete I've known personally. And he played varsity as a sophomore, and just both ways. He played offense and defense, and was actually the captain of the defensive line as a sophomore. He was a pretty incredible ball player. And I would notice before the game began, he wasn't really doing those things. He was sitting on the bench, helmet next to him, elbows on his knees, and just looking down at the top floor. And I went over to him before one of the games, and his name's Jerem. I said, Jerem, what do you do? What are you doing before the game? I know everybody else is doing this stuff, and you don't know what you do. And he said, I'm just going over game film in my head. And we didn't have game film, even in small high school. he was going through the plays in his head. The ones that he did really, really well, he was replaying over and over again and envisioning himself doing it right. And the times where he had made a mistake, he was envisioning that, but he was correcting the mistake. And so it's better than game film. It was edited game film, where he's just envisioning, this is what I should have done, and here's what it would have looked like, and here's how it would have happened. And he was envisioning it over and over and over again, so that then he would get up and he would put on his helmet and he would go out there, and where everybody else, it was all about adrenaline, they'd get lit up, and the adrenaline was gone. Which explained why we had the record that we had. But he was incredible, because he'd go out and he would execute what he had envisioned over and over and over again. He had made it a reality. Do you understand why I'm telling you that little story? As you approach the seminary classroom, not just before the first day, but as you go on through it, you need to be envisioning, how am I going to cultivate this? How am I going to get this to come from the students? And how am I going to help them do these things? When they make the comment, how am I going to validate this in a way that shows how much I appreciate their help? Am I going to write letters home to say, I want you to be aware of something that your son said in class today that I thought was so great? When those letters go to mom and dad, they tend to be read to the child, and the child tends to want to be worthy of that kind of praise again. So I hope you're thinking of those kinds of strategies and thinking, what are the things, and envisioning yourself doing those things, and then going and making it happen. When you envision what needs to happen, that you need the students to do, and that you need to do, you need to have a game plan. And so have some of these discussions, and have some of those prayerful, pondering moments, and then go make it happen. I know that the Lord has a vested interest in your success. And so he will give you vision, and he'll help you give the students vision. And when that vision is united, you'll have the experiences that you're praying to have. And I say that in the name of Jesus Christ.
Amen.
Did you, Brother Boyle?
It is I.